The blizzard had been raging for 17 days. Ryan huddled in the cramped emergency pod, his breath forming ice crystals in the frigid air. The heating unit had failed on day 3. His rations would last maybe another week if he was careful. The distress beacon blinked weakly in the corner, its power cell dying just like everything else on this frozen hell of a planet. He shouldn't have been here. The survey mission to Glacius 7 was supposed to be routine. Catalog the indigenous life, take some samples, return to the orbiting ship within 48 hours. But the storm had come out of nowhere. A white wall of fury that separated him from his shuttle. Now that shuttle was buried under 20 feet of snow somewhere in the wastes, and Ryan was slowly freezing to death in a pod designed for temporary shelter, not extended survival. On day 18, Ryan heard the scratching. At first he thought it was the wind, or maybe his mind finally succumbing to hypothermia-induced hallucinations. But the sound persisted, a deliberate scraping against the pod's outer hull. Something was out there. Ryan's hand moved to the plasma pistol at his belt. The surveys had indicated minimal fauna on Glacius 7, nothing larger than the ice rabbits they'd cataloged. But 18 days of isolation did things to a person's judgment. He unsealed the inner airlock door and peered through the frosted porthole. A pair of crystalline blue eyes stared back at him. Ryan jerked backward, his heart hammering. The eyes blinked, a slow reptilian movement. Then a pale snout pressed against the porthole, and Ryan saw it clearly. A dragon hatchling, no larger than a terrier, its scales the color of fresh snow. An albino. The creature scratched at the door again, more insistently this time. It made a sound, not quite a chirp, not quite a growl. Something between a bird's call and a mammal's whine. Ryan had studied the preliminary xenobiology reports. Dragons of Glacius 7 weren't supposed to be social creatures. They certainly weren't supposed to seek out other species. But this one was trying to get in. Against every protocol screaming in his head, Ryan opened the outer door a crack. The hatchling immediately squeezed through, a blast of snow following it inside. It shook itself like a wet dog, ice crystals flying from its scales, then looked up at Ryan with those impossibly blue eyes. "Well," Ryan muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Guess I've got company now." He named the creature Frost. Over the next 3 days, Frost proved to be more than just company. The hatchling seemed to understand that Ryan was in trouble. It brought things, small frozen creatures that Ryan could thaw and cook for protein. Chunks of a strange luminescent fungus that burned longer and hotter than his remaining fuel cells. Most remarkably, Frost curled around Ryan at night, its body temperature somehow warmer than anything else on this frozen planet. Ryan's fever started on day 21. It came suddenly, a wave of heat and delirium that made him think briefly that the heating unit had miraculously repaired itself. But no, this was infection. The cut on his leg, the one he'd gotten when the storm first hit, had turned ugly despite his best efforts to treat it. Now red lines crept up his calf and his temperature spiked dangerously high. He was going to die here. Frost sensed the change immediately. The hatchling became agitated, pacing the small pod, making distressed sounds. It nudged Ryan with its snout, trying to get him to move. When Ryan couldn't respond, Frost did something extraordinary. It grabbed Ryan's collar in its small jaws and pulled. "No," Ryan mumbled, fever confused. "Can't. Too cold out there." But Frost was insistent. The hatchling, barely 20 pounds, somehow dragged Ryan's full weight toward the airlock. It was impossible. The creature shouldn't have had the strength. Yet it pulled with desperate determination. Those blue eyes fixed on something Ryan couldn't see. Outside, the storm had finally broken. Frost dragged Ryan across the snow, leaving a trail in the pristine white. Ryan faded in and out of consciousness, aware only of movement, of cold, of those small jaws never letting go of his jacket. Time became meaningless. The fever made everything dreamlike and strange. When Ryan finally came to, he was warm. Not pod warm. Not frost warm. Actually, genuinely warm. He opened his eyes to find himself in a cave surrounded by dragons. Adult dragons, their scales varying shades of white and pale blue, their massive bodies radiating heat. Frost sat nearby, looking exhausted but pleased with itself. An older dragon, Frost's parent perhaps, regarded Ryan with intelligent, measuring eyes. They had brought him to their nest. Ryan later learned that Glacius 7 dragons were more sophisticated than any survey had suggested. They had language, culture, even primitive technology. They simply avoided humans, having learned long ago that the best way to survive contact with spacefaring species was to appear primitive and uninteresting. But Frost had been different. Young, curious, and somehow able to sense that the human in the broken pod needed help, the hatchling had defied its elders' warnings and made contact. Then when Ryan's condition worsened, Frost had called for help in the only way it knew how, by bringing Ryan home. The dragons treated Ryan's infection with a paste made from the same luminescent fungus Frost had brought to the pod. Within days the fever broke. Within a week Ryan could walk again. The dragons, seeing his determination to return to his people, helped him locate his buried shuttle. They even helped excavate it, their powerful claws making short work of the snow. On the day Ryan finally left Glacius 7, Frost stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. The hatchling had grown in the weeks since their first meeting, its scales gleaming like polished ice in the pale sun. Ryan knelt down and Frost approached one last time, pressing its snout against Ryan's chest. "Thank you," Ryan whispered, knowing the words couldn't convey everything he felt. "You saved my life." Frost chirped once softly, then turned and disappeared into the snow. Later, when Ryan filed his report, he left out the intelligence, the language, the culture. The dragons had kept their secret for generations, and he would honor that. But he made sure to note one thing in the official record. Glacius 7 was home to a species of extraordinary compassion, capable of acts of selfless heroism that rivaled anything humanity had ever achieved. And somewhere in the frozen wastes of that distant world, an albino hatchling named Frost was becoming a legend among its own people, the dragon who had saved a human, and in doing so, had proven that courage and compassion weren't uniquely human traits at all. They were universal.